Hello everyone, this is the Cluster API Office Hour. Today is February 18, 2026. Before starting, usually a reminder that we abide to the code of conduct. And let's get started. So at the beginning, so we have an agenda doc. Please go add your name to the attendee list. And if you have topic, feel free to add them to the agenda as well. At the beginning, we welcome new attendee. So if there is someone which is new to this meeting and want to introduce themselves, please use the raise hand feature and introduce yourself to the team. Okay, looks like we don't have new attendee, so we move to open proposal readout. We have two open proposals currently: independent work and topology and external CI, external CA. Is there someone that want to add something about this proposal? We are going discussion on both of them.
Nothing really to add. We're just working on the um, joining worker machines at older Kate's version issue.
Yeah, maybe I give a little bit context. So, let me say this is we are discussing detail and on about independent working group, and we did a few things. So there are some quick win of work that can be done immediately, and we open two issue. One is this one, and the other is about surface version. So just to point to people, maybe we link them. So this one is the easiest one. We would like to surface a little bit more version on clusters, on the cluster resources. So the day that we will get more versions, different version in different machine deployment, etc., etc. The user will have a little bit of visibility. It is a quick win, a problem on its own, and is being here. There is a proposal, some discussion going on, and also a PR already there. So if you are interested, take a look. The second one is a well-known problem. Oh, there is a typo here in Kubernetes. So as of today, most of us are using the Kubernetes booster provider, and based on how we do Kubernetes join, and it will be an issue basically joining a machine on a machine deployment. If we pin the machine deployment to an older version, here there is a discussion reference to the Kubernetes policies. And yeah, discussion is going on, and we're making progress towards an idea or a solution or a couple of proposals. So yeah, if you are interested about this work, we're making progress, trying to carve out some initial work while we refine the big picture. Does this sound good, Igor?
Yeah, it sounds great. We're hoping to have some POCs ready for tomorrow.
Oh, that's nice. Uh, okay, and tomorrow we have our we set up a sort of breakout meeting where we will dive into stuff. If you are interested, please reach out to Igor. Okay, so if there are no more things to add for open proposal, we can move to discussion topic. Mike?
Yeah. So I wanted to follow up on some of the Bootstrap, kubeadm Bootstrap stuff. And I spent a lot of time going through the code and everything. And first of all, I really appreciate Fabrizio and Stefan, your comments in chat. They helped make my investigation shorter. And looking through the code, like I can definitely see how there could be some sort of like actuator type pattern or something similar where like, the kubeadm part is kind of on its own and the back end part is like whatever. But I was really curious about the comment that you made, Fabrizio, about like decoupling even the cloud init stuff from the kubeadm, like CR and everything. And so I wanted to kind of ask a little bit more about that. You know, were you thinking, were you thinking pulling like the ignition and the cloud and its stuff, specific stuff out of there, and then you would just have like the one field that tells like what the output format is supposed to be, or did you have other ideas about how to, I guess, how to transform that or what it might look like in your ideal vision?
Yeah, I give you an angle. Let's try to. Yeah, I agree on the fact that we should time box because also last week we really invested a lot on this meeting. So let me say where my idea comes from. So my idea comes from if I don't know if you look at this picture about Cluster API, there is nothing about Inition, Cloud Init, OS. Because basically Cluster API in its design must be agnostic to all this detail. It must work with every bootstrapper, every OS, etc., etc. And if you look and if you do a deep dive on the bootstrap provider, this is what we are talking about. I use let me go there. So I have some example of the API.
I think you had a wrong migration doc.
Hmm?
You mean the migration doc where we had like
Yes.
entire kubeadm configs in there? Next one, yeah.
Yeah, this one. Okay. Let's look at the kubeadmin config. And please take a look at the at the right part, which is the new one. So if you look at the part that we care about, we are talking about disk setup, files, format. So those are machine properties. There is not really, apart from this field and this field, in this API object, we sort of try to model how a machine could look like. There is nothing that is specific, that is specific to a bootstrap process except these two fields, basically. Okay, so, and in fact, the bootstrap provider is not running Inition or Cloud Init. It just generates a secret where there is a script. Okay, so if you put all this together, I think that ideally we have to clean up this API from everything that is specific for a single booster provider, and also in the implementation of the booster controller, we just have to generate a string. We don't even need a import or a dependency that is specific to this booster provider. Okay. So we really have to keep this as minimal as possible. So we are solving part of the problem, most of the problem that we are bringing. We are carry over from some time now, and really, what will happen is that we sort of realign to this picture where we are moving to the layer below all these kind of problems. So copy remain as clean as possible, as portable as possible. Booster provider remain as clean as possible, as portable as possible. And when you arrive, you finally kick off a VM, you pass metadata to the VM, then at this point, this thing become actually important.
I mean that all makes total sense to me, Fabrizio, and I'm completely with you. Part of what I want to understand here is like, okay, so we have the kubeadm bootstrap provider, which is supposed to take these inputs and it generates a string on the outside that is utilized by the bootstrap provider, and then the contract defines how the CAPI objects are supposed to be updated so that the CAPI controllers know that the underlying things have happened, whatever those things are. And I'm kind of curious. So, like in looking at the kubeadm bootstrap provider, right? as a user, I say, okay, these are the inputs that I want to send. I want to tell about the disk format. I want to tell about the files. And then this particular Bootstrap provider is going to use kubeadm to turn that into something that makes a node. And the details as a user aren't really specific. I don't care about them. And Cluster API shouldn't care about them either. So
Yeah.
my question was, if you have a kubeadm, you know, config object, and you've said, okay, here's the inputs I need. And somewhere there is a controller, whether it's a Cloud init controller or Ignition controller or a foobar controller. And it's going to take that and it's going to do something. And then should it be updating the status or the conditions on the kubeadm config so that the next part knows that we can proceed? Like how do we communicate back in an asynchronous way that the kubeadm config has taken the input and something, whether it's Cloud init or Ignition or whatever, is going to actually do the work, and then it needs to report back in kind of a generic way to Cluster API. Yes, I've done the thing, whatever the thing is. Do you envision that being like conditions on the kubeadm config, or is there like another pathway that this would be communicated back to Cluster API? That's part of where my confusion is at the moment.
So as of today, this is very simple. So in the Bootstrap config, so the Kubernetes config, the only thing that has to do is basically it has to create a secret and add the data secret in this name.
Right.
This is what tells Capi that the Bootstrap config finished its own work. Okay, it does this and then it is done. From the infra machine side, basically the infra machine will be responsible to read the secret and then to surface the provider ID.
Right, right.
Okay, and the final piece of the picture is the machine controller that will see a node show up.
Right.
So if you look at Cluster API from Cluster API point of view, it's sort of Bootstrap, do whatever you do,
Right.
store the result in a secret.
Right.
Then infra provider is responsible to pick the secret, attach to the VM, metadata. Every cloud provider has its own way, API call to do this.
Right.
Okay,
They'll do
then
whatever they need to, yeah.
exactly. Then the machine Bootstrap, okay, and the only things that we need from the infrastructure provider is the provider ID, which is what we are using to check if the node came up.
Right.
And that's it. So everything happened in the between. We generate the data secret and the node show up. Cluster API is totally agnostic.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so like when I look at the kubeadm or the cab PK controller the way it is now, when I look at that kubeadm part, I can see the sections in the code where it says, okay, like, here's the string I'm going to take back, and now I'm going to put it in the secret, right? The controller is doing that right now. And if we're going to abstract away the detail of where that string comes from, right? And the KBK controller just says, hey, I've had a request for this. I generate the string, and the string is now in the secret. Like, is it appropriate to separate these two, or should we have should we have a kubeadm Cloud init provider and a kubeadm Ignition provider? Like, could we separate the back end and like actuate it or something, right? Like, is there some way to communicate this without needing the code in the kubeadm in KBK to actually call directly and say, make me the string? Is there like a way that we could have like just a controller running that services the request? I'm trying to understand what architectures would work here.
That should be the work of the research group. But if I look at this today, and let's try to try. If I look at this,
right, this is exactly what I've been looking at. I'm kind of like wondering what would be tolerable to the community, because I don't want us to go design something and then we come back and say, okay, yeah, we've got this coordinated action of conditions between the kubeadm object and the whatever the controller is. That seems like over designed. So I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Like
if I look at what we have today for Cloud init,
yeah,
is just a couple of Go templates.
Right.
And if I look, and this is, let me say, I will say sustainable because, there is not not really maintenance around these, and we are just translating the Kubernetes API format in a format which is more or less the same.
Right.
Okay. If I look at what we have for Ignition instead, is for some part, it is roughly the same. So we have all template also for Ignition. I cannot find them now, but I'm pretty sure we have.
Right, but it needs to be. It can't just be a simple template. It's got to be transpiled into the whatever.
And this is where the issues happen,
Right.
because in order to do, since the Ignition is just not, here we are, the template is not enough these, but we have to take these, pass them into something that is very Ignition specific. Basically, what is happening is that something that is specific of the machine is now bubbling up to another level. And probably, Stefan, it looks like that the transpiler is also OS specific.
Right. That's yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So I think that since we have Ignition folks, we have to go back to them. Hey, why Ignition needs this layer of complexity? Because we are bubbling up problems that are specific to the OS to the place where we are generating the machine bootstrap. Can't be this resolved inside the VM or in some other way? Because this is where the issue, the friction happen. Because basically we are trying to move up something that is bootstrap specific, something that is OS specific, in a place where we don't want and we don't need. And so, since we are bubbling this up, basically we are bubbling this up. That means that now in Capri we have Ignition dependencies. We have a bunch of import that come from Ignition, Flatcar, etc., etc. And this is where we got friction, because why I have a Flatcar and not Ubuntu or whatever? So there is also Windows, and this is where the problem snowballs. If we can get, instead of having the transpiler, we just generate a sort of YAML. It is just a template. That's it. It is Go template generation. We have 2, 3, 4 different variant of templates. Who care? It is just one file, a simple unit test, no dependencies.
Right. I mean, and this is go ahead, Stefan.
And I think so. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is something like the following. So this whole Ignition transpiler story is something like, depending on the operating system you're targeting for, you basically have a different input format of the transpiler, and then the transpiler does roughly, let's say, a YAML to JSON conversion, and also there's like a bit of a wording that the YAML is more human readable and the JSON is more machine readable. I didn't find good examples that tell me what exactly it's different, but okay, that's fine. So, but if I got it right, essentially, the input is very specific to OS. The output, I don't know, but even the input is specific. So if I got it right, basically, there's no real way for Capri to generate something with a Go template that would just work for all of this stuff, because it depends on OS how it has to look like. And I think one idea that came up last week is the following. Let me take one more step back and from a slightly different angle. So today, what we basically do is we have our API service kube.m config, and then we are basically have one round of rendering, which goes from kube.m config to cloud init. And we have a different path of rendering, which basically goes from kube.m config to Ignition transpiler input, then through transpiler, and then we have Ignition transpiler output, right? Yeah. And I think one idea that we had last week was something like, or that Tilo brought up, if I got it right, we could also potentially go from basically kube.adm config, then to cloud init. Cloud init basically fully represents what is possible in our API, except this one Ignition specific field. But otherwise, it basically matches what you have on kube.adm config.
Right.
And what we might be able to do is basically take that cloud init as an output of the bootstrap provider.
Right.
And then use that to basically read it and then just output whatever you need for Ignition.
Right.
Then run that stuff through the Ignition pipeline. and then put the result of that on the machine.
Right.
Right. And that might allow you to essentially use the Bootstrap provider in, like, let's say, full cloud end mode, essentially.
Right.
And then have something later in the pipeline that is also more aware of the operating system to come up with the right ignition file. And if I remember correctly, we already have special code for ignition in infra providers. I also think that infra providers know much better about the image that they're going to deploy, because that's entirely opaque to the Bootstrap provider. Bootstrap provider has no clue if this will be like a Fedora, a Flatcar, or Windows or Linux. It just has absolutely zero knowledge about that. So yeah, so TLDR, I think one idea at least was to use the Bootstrap provider more or less as it is, but get rid of that one ignition specific field, and then go later in the pipeline somewhere around infra provider to take that output of the Bootstrap provider and then do whatever has to be done for ignition, if ignition should be used, plus combine it with information for which operating system we're going to do all of this. And then the infra provider is anyway already that component that is supposed to hand over ignition during VM creation to the VM in AWS or wherever. Yeah, that's just like a rough sketch.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, that's kind of the direction we were going. And I just want to note, we're at 15 minutes here, so I'm just going to kind of ask one more question and then we can move on to the next topic. But like for next steps, right? Because I agree with you, like at some level, yeah, what we're looking at is the kubeadm provider the way it is now. If we just took the ignition stuff out and let it create the cloud init in the secret, like there could be another controller that could just change the secret to ignition format if that's what's needed on that platform or whatever. But what I want to understand from the community here is, like, how much of a decoupling can we propose in, you know, as changes to CAB-BK before, you know, the preference would just be to see an alternate boot. Like we should just write a different Bootstrap provider that just does this on its own. Like we shouldn't try to stuff all this together. Like, is there room to build like kind of an actuation model here where, yeah, we could pull out the ignition field, but we still leave the format and that does something? Or should we just pull out the format as well and let the infrastructure provider totally control this before it creates machines or whatever?
I don't know. In the sense that
That's fair. I mean, we're still exploring this
yeah,
space. So
we,
yeah.
we are still exploring. For sure, what is sort of complex today is not really the format, because if I go back to the API, the real issue is that is not the format field in per se.
Right.
Is the fact that depending on the format that I pick, for instance, disk setup have different meaning or different valid option, etc., etc.
Right.
So basically, the apart this field which is in the wrong layer,
Right.
what is not nice is that now with this format we are changing somehow the semantic of the other fields, and this is
Right.
confusing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But let me say we can discuss. I go a second back to what Stefan is saying. So let me say, for sure, at this layer, the layer of Bootstrap provider, we don't have all the info.
Right.
Okay. However, it seems to me that is also not ideal to bring those problems into infra provider, because then you have basically to this will be something that impact all the infra providers, if you think about it. So the more we move this problem near to where ignition run, the simpler is the solution.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you imagine that ignition on a machine can take into in input, instead of a transpiled thingy, a cloud init thingy, and basically automatically do the job between the two.
Right.
Basically, we are moving and this will work in every OS, because at this point you are in the OS, you know if you are in Fedora, Flatcar, or whatever, you know which option makes sense for you, etc., etc. So we are moving near to when ignition actually run. I think this will be a way better solution than having in the infra provider, but having in the infra provider is already a step forward to the an improvement from where we are now.
Yeah. So let me just repeat that back and then we can move on.
Mm.
Because I think I get what you're saying here. It's like, yeah, the cloud init output is like our lingua franca inside the secret. And then in the infrastructure, provider or whatever, like that could be a place where on the infrastructure template for a specific provider, the user might have a selection to say, I want to use Ignition here instead of cloud init. And then as the instance is being created, at that point, the infrastructure provider, the concrete infrastructure provider can read that desire for Ignition and just do the transpilation there before it creates the node and stuffs the user data in. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that could be, honestly, let me say, the cloud init today, like Stefan is saying, is sort of mapping one-to-one to the API.
Right.
So if you don't want of the kubeadmin config API, so if you don't want to parse ignition, instead of reading the data secret, you just use the existence of the data secret as a signal that everything is good, and you read the bootstrap config. But
Right.
let me say that's an implementation detail.
Yeah. Plus you should steal the kubeadm parts out of that. But that's not hard, right? So basically, but it's just like a few files within the cloud init thing. It's not hard to get them out of the cloud init part and ignore the rest if you want to.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I was looking at and I realize we're going way over time. I was looking at the current kubeadm controller and just seeing could we pull out the parts here where like Ignition is doing stuff and kind of make a cleaner interface? But I think I'll follow up on what we talked about here today. These are some great ideas. Unfortunately, I probably won't be at the working group meeting tomorrow, but this is good. Like, I think we can start talking about some different ideas, and then we can, see what we can do. I appreciate the discussion.
Maybe just to add one more point, and then maybe next topic. I think if we write up like the different options that we have on where like basically the ignition thing would be done, I don't know, somewhere between Bootstrap or Infra or somewhere on the OS or somewhere in the infra providers, etc., etc. I think we will also see different benefits in the sense of some of the solutions are very, very specific to the kubeadm Bootstrap provider, and they will only help you with the kubeadm Bootstrap provider, right? But not with any other Bootstrap provider. While other solutions might help you independent of Bootstrap providers, or it might just help you in general, right? Because basically, if you can get, I don't know how realistic it is, but if you can basically get an operating system that today can only speak Ignition to also be able to work with cloud in it, that also helps you way beyond cluster API. So I think definitely worth like considering like or writing up like the few different like high level options that we're thinking about, and then basically writing a pro con list for those.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think that's what we'll focus on next. Is kind of enumerating some different options that we have, and then maybe come back here in a month or something and talk through them again to see like what makes sense. And who knows, I started to like hack on a POC of like a different style of Bootstrap provider, so maybe some of that can be converted into what we're doing. So, all right, cool, appreciate it. Thank you, Stefan and Fabrizio.
Thank you, Mike, for trying to help there. Okay, Stefan, you have the next one.
Yep. Yeah, I promise to Fabrizio, keep that one short. Let's see. So basically, we found an issue in API server that happens if you have a CRD with multiple API versions and if you use server-side apply. So multiple API versions plus server-side apply equals trouble. The problem is essentially that the API server under certain circumstances just drops the entire managed fields of an object, and accordingly, basically, the API server forgets who owned which object before. We've opened an issue in the KK repo. We brought up a thread in SIG API machinery. Joe, who's one of the 1, 2, 3 people who's most familiar with that code, sort of said like, oh, this sounds like a serious bug. And made a suggestion how to fix it. And we opened a PR for it. And basically, I mean, we're hoping to get it in, but we have to wait for reviews, etc., and sort of see how that goes. It's not exactly one of the easiest places in APIs to make changes, but we're somewhat hopeful that maybe that makes it. So the fix would be something like in a scenario where in the past the API so dropped all managed fields, it would just keep the managed fields the same, which has a bit of other downsides. But if someone is more interested, feel free to look at the issue, the PR, and I can also link you the Slack thread somewhere. But it should be easy to find a SIG API machine within the last week. So given that we have to assume that at any given point in time, the managed fields are just getting lost, and this will stay like that for a while until it gets merged and everyone can use that API server version. We also wanted to mitigate it in cluster API. Just really important to mention, this is only relevant, as far as I can tell, it's only relevant if you're using server-side apply. If you don't touch it, which would be my recommendation, it should be fine. But sometimes it's not under your control. Like, I don't know what your consumers, users, customers are using to apply your YAMLs, right? But what we're trying to do here in that PR is basically we're trying to fix the cases where copy itself or KCP itself is using server-side apply, so that in those situations we basically end up with a better behavior than just things are failing in very weird ways. So what we did is basically in those controllers that are using server-side apply, before we're doing server-side apply, we check the objects if they are basically in a bad state from managed field perspective. And in those cases, we are basically trying to clean them up in a way that the subsequent server-side applies are working as good as they can. We added a very special handling for KCP because in KCP we know that we have some problems. So the main problem with losing ownership is essentially that if you want, so you lose ownership and then on the very next apply call, you want to unset fields, that basically doesn't work. If you do another server-side apply with your previous state, then the managed fields are recovering. But if on the next call you want to do an unset, then it doesn't work. So basically what we're doing is that if we detect a situation for KCP where we lost our managed fields, we are reconstructing some parts of the managed fields that on the very next reconcile, we are able to remove extra arcs specifically. So we know that we have like a hotspot and a problem with extra arcs. So basically we're recovering extra arcs so that with extra arcs, you basically never have a problem because of that issue. Okay, I already went way too much into details than what I want to. Anyone interested in more details? You can definitely look at the PRs and issues, but if there are more questions already, feel free to bring it up. Now, yeah.
Yep, thank you. Just to add 2 cents. So the issue is in the API server. So it is not only a copy issue. It applies to every object in Kubernetes in theory under the same circumstances. And the problem is that, and there are tools like Argo CD, probably also Flux, that use server-side apply. So yeah, keep an eye on it. And
yeah, maybe I should have shared like just before Igor takes on, maybe I should have shared slightly more details on when it happens. So you have an object, that object has multiple API versions in its managed fields. Then you do a client-side write request. So everything that is not a server-side apply, you do that against the object. And then when the API server tries to handle that request, it has to do requests against the conversion webhook, which is basically our own controller. If that request fails because the controller is not available, because your network is down, whatever, if that returns an error, the API server will hit a code path, which logs should not happen, and then removes all managed fields from that object. Yeah, that's the story. Not fun.
not fun at all. Igor?
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty serious bug. Have we seen this manifest itself as like bugs within Cappy that we should look out for?
So the cases that we noticed are essentially that this issue happens. Usually, let's say the situations where our conversion webhooks are not available is something like, you upgrade the copy controller or something, right? And then it takes a bit until conversion is back, or it can take a bit depending on how you roll it out. So basically, so the issue happens, and what we noticed the most, or we had the most reports, is KCP, because in KCP, when you want to update the extra arc array and you want to change, I don't know, the value of an extra arc, basically, what you do is you keep the name the same, you want to change the value, And if that update to the array basically does not have the correct ownership, then instead of replacing an entry in that extra arc list, it will add an entry and will keep the old entry because the ownership for the old entry was lost. And then either, depending on copy versions, if you have beta 1, it's fine because it was mapped there. If you have beta 2, you have an array. And in beta 2, we have validation that basically in that array, you can only have a unique name. So we will drop that in the future, but you can only have a unique name. So basically, if you hit that scenario with beta 2, that you want to change an array element, but it actually gets added instead of an existing one changed, you will have a cell validation error, unique names. What we also hit in the past was stuff like you want to go from one Kubernetes version to another. Your managed fields are messed up. You have to drop a cloud provider extra arc field because the API server dropped it at some point. But actually, the extra arc field just stays around, and then your API server doesn't start on the next machine that we create. So those are like the two most frequent ones that we saw with that issue.
Got it.
Yeah, and it took us some time to basically nail down the problem, and now we think that we found the root cause in API server, but just we are seeing some strange reports since I don't know, 2 years, 3
Yeah, we
years.
just had also different root causes in the past.
Mm.
So if you used
Yeah.
like classic class with copy 1.0 and then you jumped over the wrong versions and that sort of stuff, there's also a bit of fun around that. But basically that new root cause, we just realized that last week, literally. Yeah. But I would say the general case is something like if you drop the managed fields, then you can have problems with everything that you want to unset later. That's just like the general problem.
Yes.
Any sort of field that you want to unset. If you did not, so if you do another server-side apply after you lost the managed fields with like, like your previous state of the object, managed fields will just recover. But if on the next call you wanna get rid of something, it will usually just stay around. If you have server-side apply use cases outside of what we try to handle already with our PR, like, I don't know, someone else is writing the cluster object with server-side apply or something, I would probably recommend to take a look at that PR. But there are good unit tests there, which probably explain a little bit more and also explain a little bit more how we are mitigating that problem exactly. There are also like a bit of sub cases to that problem. But I think I'll leave it there for the moment. We can definitely talk about it again or go a bit deeper in Slack threads or something.
Okay. And next is Mike.
Yeah, I may have mentioned this already, but since I've been in and out of like availability for the last year, I wanted to physically in person mention it. Big thank you to everyone on this team. And in case anybody's listening from the CapZ and Kappa teams, I know I've mentioned it at least to the CapZ team. Big thank you for everything that you've done. Adobe has migrated, I would say, 85% of its fleet, which is about 400 and something clusters over to Cluster API now with CapZ and Kappa. So we're using Carpenter for most of our node management, which means we're not using, but we are using machine pools for parts of every cluster. So we are using, Cluster API for a lot of it, but we are managing the clusters themselves. And like I said, some machine pools all with Cappy, and we're very happy. We've gone through multiple upgrades, been using it for a while. This actually, we got to 60% last year, and I wasn't around for that to let you all know and say thank you then. But now that I'm here, I am. We expect to be 95% in the next 2 months. And the long tail, of course, is always a long tail for whatever reason. But yeah, so very exciting for us. And just wanted to say thank you for all your help over the years and all of that. So thank you.
It is exciting for us to listen to this kind of feedback. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the hard work to make it happen. And yeah, looking forward for feedback or idea if you have any. It is a great use case for copy. If you would like someday to write I don't know, a blog post or something, let me know. I can help out.
Yeah, I do want to do that. I do also want to send along just a few couple of things, something I've been meaning to do about like custom operators in general, like things that would make custom operators in general helpful that also apply to Cappy. But I do want to, it's been on my to-do list, well, since last year before I went out on disability, but just a success story sort of thing for how we leveraged it. We've talked about it at talks like at reInvent and KubeCon and other places, KCD days and all that kind of stuff. But I'd love to write something up that
no pressure at all. If you sometime you get to it, feel free to reach out. And
Yeah.
thank you again.
Yeah, definitely.
I saw some compliment on in chat and also some reaction in Zoom. And there are no more topic in agenda. So is there some last minute topics? Good. So thank you everyone for the meeting. See you next week. Have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.
Thanks. Later, buddy.